Well, it's September the 15th, and we've apparently have got our recall election in California over with, and I'll get into that a little bit too, and also talk a bit about this General Mark Milley, our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the latest story on him coming out of Bob Woodward's book. So I'll kind of want to hit both of these subjects today. Let's start off quickly with the California recall. We'll get into that a little bit. Newsom obviously won the thing with the no vote being somewhere on the 64% level right now in the count. There's something allegedly a couple of million more votes to count or something. It'll probably close up a little bit more maybe as the votes from outlying areas and stuff come in. But it looks like this is coming fairly close to modeling his election victory in the election of 2018 when he was elected governor. So it looks like Newsom, basically I think what we can say here is that California is California, and yes, it is a left-wing Democrat state, and yes, there's some really serious conservative Republicans in pockets out there, but not enough to win statewide. And there is some major penetration to Latino vote. 42% of them voted for the recall, so apparently they're not quite on board with everybody else. Clearly, the women are a decisive factor in keeping Newsom in, and I think that that's because I get the feeling in general that women are just a lot more afraid of COVID than the men are for some reason. Ironically enough, the men die 2 to 1 more frequently due to COVID than women do. I mean, what famous woman have you heard of that had died of COVID? Well, I'm sure there are some, but you all the time hear about well-known people, conservative talk show hosts or whatever, that males that die of COVID, right? So at any rate, I think that kind of explains a lot of it. And of course, the recall actually occurred during the peak of the Delta variant. Probably if it had happened at a different time, the results might have been a little more favorable to recall, although I doubt in any scenario they really would have won, because it's such a Democrat state and people are fleeing the state. And I suspect that on balance, the Republicans are more likely to flee the state than the Democrats. So, although some Democrats are obviously coming just because their job got transferred or something. So at any rate, that's kind of my view on that. I didn't comment on it, I don't believe, until now at all, basically because I didn't want to be negative. I mean, you don't want to be the naysayer that's really would like the recall to have happened, but just analytically figures, well, it's probably not going to. Well, I can only hope that the Democrats are sharp enough not to take too much belief that this means they've been vindicated, because in reality, I think that it does kind of show that what result did you expect? That seems to be kind of the issue. That there's kind of a cognitive gap here. That although things are going down the drain out there, apparently most people out there don't really connect to what you should do about it is to vote the current people leading the place out of office. And also add the fact that the Democrats had a tremendous money advantage, and they had the advantage of mass mail-out ballots, which is a dubious thing. I doubt that you can really say, though, that fraud won the election in this case, given the margins. At any rate, so because that's kind of the way on that. And so if you like these videos, please give me a like. It helps with the algorithm. And if you haven't subscribed, if you're on YouTube, you can subscribe, or you can set up a YouTube account and subscribe. And then, of course, for notifications, click the bell. Okay, now let's get on to General Milley. I think that's the main point, and that's my cover on this one, but I did want to kind of address the California thing. Milley, according to Woodward's book, as we understand it now, has made a bunch of really crazy, he apparently got some kind of a wild hair notion in his head that Trump was going to try to start a war with China in order to, help him maintain control or something. I don't know. I have no idea why he thought that Trump would want to start a war with China, let alone a nuclear war. But if he did the things they're saying, it looks like his judgment is incredibly flawed, as well as his lack of respect for the proper constitutional, authority. I mean, did he seriously think that Trump was going to just kind of out of nowhere issue an attack order against China to launch a missile or something? I mean, or a swarm of missiles? I mean, The idea just seems so completely insane as to be not taken too seriously. But that's apparently what the guy was doing, if the reports are true. And I mean, Woodward, although I'm not saying he doesn't exaggerate a little bit, he seems to have a fair amount of detail in the issue. And I think he's also known to tape record interviews. So and we have heard nothing from Milley since then. One can only assume maybe he's consulting a lawyer or maybe a public relations expert. Because I think the worst thing of all is he calls up the General Lee of the Chief of Staff of the so-called People's Liberation Army, as it's called. There's a lot of liberation in that army. But at any rate, it turns out that that he's anyhow. Basically told them that if we were going to attack him, that he would tell them, he would warn them, or something to that effect. I mean, like, if the attack is really going to happen, that's kind of like the last thing you want to do, particularly if you're talking nuclear. I mean, get your missiles in the air because ours are coming. I mean, that does not make any sense at all. I mean, that is completely, well, the word treasonous is kind of thrown out, and I think that's probably appropriate. This is crazy. I mean, and if he really did this, then I'm clearly in he's got to be gone. I mean, this is beyond, normal behavior and all that sort of thing. I do tend to agree with one thing is probably true. I sort of doubt that if you really are in DEFCON 5 or whatever they call it nowadays, I think they changed the terminology if I remember correctly, and supposedly, we're in a state of no threat. There's nothing. NORAD's detecting nothing. Intel's detecting nothing. There's no conflict. And out of the blue, they actually get a coded attack order from the White House against, say, China. I have a feeling that somebody at the Strategic Command is probably going to go, whoa, is this real? Let's call up the White House and verify this is for real and what's going on here. I sort of tend to think that there is kind of a safety catch like that in the system, which might be still annoy some of the certain people that are talking about the constitutionalism. But, I have a funny feeling that the willingness at the top level, particularly to just launch missiles on a whim, isn't that high. So in that sense, I can have it, but to actually have coordinations like, hey, this could really happen, people. Watch out for it. I think that's so over the top that if that's true, it definitely shows that Trump's relations with all of his key subordinates weren't what they ought to be. I mean, but at the same time, I think that this is getting a little much if he actually tells the Chinese general that, hey, if we are going to attack you, I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to hit you by surprise. I mean, you can imagine what the Chinese general are going, these Americans are nuts. I mean, totally out of it. But anyhow, that's my preliminary comments on Milley. We haven't heard from him yet, so everybody's entitled to his statement. I find it interesting he's not denied it yet, which I find very interesting. And given the fact that, at least in the case of Trump, and remember the famous thing about what he knew about the virus and how that came out to kind of, contradict some public statements, that kind of thing. I suspect that the guy may have tape recordings, and he's probably interviewed other people. So, this will be interesting to see how that develops. On the other hand, you never know. The Biden administration kind of protects its own. And I think, I guess Biden isn't worried about, we don't know what Biden's worried about. I mean, anyhow, I'll leave that subject for future discussions. I'm sure it will come up again. And finally, I want to address the situation in Congress. Apparently, at this point in time, Joe Manchin is holding firm and is sticking up for his $1.5 trillion as opposed to $3.5 trillion idea on the next spending bill, or maybe even that the thing, I don't know, could be postponed. Although apparently the House is going forward with a full bore bill. Of course, and of course that is an interesting point. I also understand that in addition to Manchin and Sinema, that apparently John Tester of Montana has kind of joined the whatever we spend has got to be paid for school of thought. And of course, a set of tax increases have been kind of published lately as to what the House is thinking about. and they're coming down to 26.5% rather than 28 on the corporate tax, and raising capital gains from 20 to 25, and a few things of that sort. A bunch of other taxes. A lot of, and the thing is that obviously these taxes in reality will not be able to pay for something as big as the spending program is being proposed. So of course, on the other hand, I'm very cynical on these kind of hopes that a Democrat bill won't get passed. That seems to be perennial, that when the Democrats are running the show, whether it be the big health care reform bill and the Obamacare bill, or whatever you want to call it, there were hopes that that wouldn't get through, and yeah, it got through in the end. So I don't know, but if we do have 3 senators, and I think that there's another senator from New Hampshire that's going to be facing a fairly strong and popular Republican governor potentially in a challenge in the next election if that occurs. I mean, they may be a little bit nervous, and that's kind of a swing state too, very close purple state now. Used to be a strong Republican state. But so I think that there's a possibility that maybe the other people aren't speaking up are also pushing back against this massive spending package. And one thing you have to recall that understand about this is that during the so-called amendments process on a reconciliation bill, unlike a normal bill, they have to get their 51 votes, to pass amendments either way. And if one Democrat votes either no or just abstains, and 50 Republicans vote the other way, the amendment would pass. And so it's possible that the Senate bill gets gutted in the amendment process, and it might become so unacceptable to the House that they couldn't agree and the whole thing would die. And then maybe in retaliation, the progressives would kill the actual infrastructure bill, the 1.2 trillion that already passed the Senate, and that would be like our dream scenario, right? They all collapse, and something like trillions of extra spending we could ill afford right now could be just aborted. I'm not very hopeful that will actually happen, but that is the most positive thing that could happen. More than likely, they will end up with some kind of a compromise bill and end up passing a bunch more spending that we don't need. But it does look like at least some of the Democrats are holding up and not caving yet. And we'll just have to watch and see what happens. And also, there's another attempt, a so-called voting bill, as if we need another voting bill. But with the Justice Department messing around with state laws on voting, I don't think that that's really necessary at this time. But at any rate, we'll have to see what happens on that either. At the present time, if the filibuster stands, I think that will also go down. And I don't think there's 60 votes for any Democrat voting reform bill at this point. So if the filibuster holds, I think it doesn't work. But again, as I call it, the year of living dangerously. With the Democrats in this position and as amped up as they are, we don't know what's going to ultimately happen. Well, anyway, I think I'll wrap this up for now. And like I say, you can follow me on social media for some updates, and of course, if you want to wait for I generally post links to these videos. I put them out on my social media accounts, which are listed below, like Twitter, Gab, and Parler. So that's where you can find out what I'm thinking between these YouTube posts. Until next time.